Aloha, everybody. Happy Aloha Friday. And thank you for joining us wherever you are calling in. And if you are in Hilo, happy Merry Monarch Week. Welcome to today's webinar, Managing Complex Emotions in a Complex World, Utilizing Self-Care to Address Anxiety and Stress, presented by Amanda Martinez, the Trainings Program Manager at Mental Health America of Hawaii. So my name is Makamai Namahoy. I will be today's facilitator. Before we get started, I will go over some Zoom housekeepings, and then we will some housekeeping rules, and then we will roll right into the presentation. First one, thanks to organizer of this training, myself, the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui Steering Committee, as well as Mental Health America of Hawaii's chapter. Today, I want to thank the sponsors. So we have the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui, the National Association of Social Workers Hawaii chapter, the State of Hawaii's Department of Health Alcohol and Drug Abuse Division, the Commission of Dietetics Registration, the Joint Accreditation Program, the Western Region Public Health Training Center, as well as the Public Health Learning Network for sponsoring today's and providing today's continuing education credits. A few Zoom housekeeping rules. All participants, you are muted upon entry. For any questions that you have throughout the presentation for Amanda, please drop it in the chat box or the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. This meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the Hawaii Public Health Training Hui's YouTube channel. All of those links, as well as the trainer's presentation slides, will be included in a Mahalo email shortly after this training. Continuing education credits that have been provided and approved or have been approved and provided for today's session. We are offering CHES, credits for registered dietitians, licensed social workers, as well as CSAC, prevention specialists, and nursing. We have been able to reestablish our nursing credits for today's training. All credit hours will be for 1.5 credit hours. To obtain your continuing education credits, first, you must register and attend today's training. I will send you all an email shortly after this training to complete the evaluation survey. That is how I can track your CEs. Please complete that evaluation no later than next week, Wednesday, April 10th by 5 p.m. All certificates of attendance will be emailed out to folks Friday, April 19th. For those that are calling in, please email myself at makmae@hiphi.org, including your name and phone number that you used today, so I can make sure to send you that Mahalo email. And for those that are missing certificates after 2 weeks, please email myself or the Public Health Hui at hiphi.org. I would just like to reiterate, certificates are emailed to folks that do complete the evaluation survey. So please remember to complete that survey to get your certificate. All right, without further ado, I'd love to introduce Amanda to you all. Amanda is currently the Training Program Manager for Mental Health America of Hawaii. Since 2017, she has trained thousands of youth and adults in Hawaii with Mental Health America's youth suicide and bully prevention and mental wellness trainings. She is also a certified trainer for mental health first aid and youth mental health first aid trainings. Amanda received her master's in public health degree from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, specializing in social and behavioral health sciences. She is interested in mental health wellness promotion among youth and young adults, especially among sexual and gender minorities. So I would like to hand it over to Amanda. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Maka. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. Give me 1 second. I'll go ahead and share my slideshow with you folks. It should be popping up in the next couple seconds or so, but if for any reason it's not, just let me know in the chat. I can do some troubleshooting on my end. But thank you so much again for having me. I see some familiar names in the chat, so it's great to see you. I wish I was in Hilo for Merry Monarch, but unfortunately I'm here on Oahu. But the presentation we have for you all today is called Managing Complex Emotions in a Complex World. Utilizing self-care to address anxiety and stress. It's a presentation that was developed by the organization that I work for, Mental Health America of Hawaii, and our goal really is to learn more about how to take care of or manage increased feelings of anxiety or stress. And I know probably a lot of us on this Zoom call have felt those increasing feelings of anxiety and stress for any number of reasons, right? So hopefully today we can learn some new kind of strategies and approaches to be able to gauge where we are and also be able to help manage that, right, depending on where we are. And all the information that we learned today can be applied not just to ourselves, but they're absolutely things that we can pass along to other people as well. So, my background is in public health. So, just a disclaimer, I myself am not a mental health professional or a mental health clinician or anything like that. I just kind of work in that intersection of public health and mental health. So, that's kind of the place I'm coming from with all of this information here. So if there are any kind of like clinical questions, I may have to parking lot those and do some research on my end, and get back to you on those. But I do welcome questions. I also welcome interaction. I'll make sure I leave some time at the end for any questions that might pop up. But I also like to keep my eye on the chat box. So if you like have a question or a comment, feel free to drop it in there. And if it's one I can answer kind of organically in the presentation, I'll absolutely go ahead and do that. But again, I do love seeing the interaction in the chat. Here are some of our objectives for today. We're going to be taking a look at a snapshot of kind of the landscape, not just necessarily the impact of COVID-19 that has had on mental health, but really the past few years in general, right? And everything that has happened within those past few years and how that shaped and really continues to shape mental health, right? And that landscape. So taking a look at some research, some statistics specific to here in Hawaii. We're also going to explore the kind of impact that stress and anxiety can have on our bodies, right? What are those kind of physiological symptoms that we may experience, um, as well as psychological symptoms, right? So how is that stress and anxiety impacting our mind? And how do we recognize that impact in ourselves and others? And what are different approaches that we can take to help manage and or check in? Then we're going to talk about the different kind of self-care and coping skills that we can actually utilize to manage any kind of increasing feelings of stress or anxiety. And of course, if you know anything about us at Mental Health America of what we love our resources. So, and we love sharing resources too. So we'll be going over some local and national resources that are available to the community to be able to help support mental wellness, but especially to be able to address any kind of crisis situations. All right, so let's take a look at kind of what that landscape looks like, right? As far as what kind of mental health impacts have we been seeing. So I would like to note that research is still being conducted, right? It's continuously being conducted. So this data and this landscape is, continuously changing depending on the data that's being made available to all of us. But this gives us kind of a nice background, right? A foundational knowledge of kind of where we are, just like taking a pulse, right? So hopefully these numbers help you get a little bit of what that landscape is nationally. Here in the United States, we have seen a general overall increase of mental health challenges, right? Of things like anxiety, of depression, of substance use, of psychosis, kind of across the board, right? For different ages, different communities, all of that. And for those who were already experiencing a mental health challenge, we before the pandemic hit and before the past few years have happened, we've also seen an uptick in the severity of their symptoms, right? So people who were already struggling are unfortunately struggling even more so now, because of everything that has been happening. So when I say everything and when I say the past few years, it's things like the pandemic, it's natural disasters, community violence, wars, right? Everything that we see in the news, being shared on social media, in our personal lives, right? Anything that we may be going through or struggling with, all of that kind of piles up on each other, and it absolutely takes a toll on everyone's mental health in different ways. We see here too that almost 18% of residents here in Hawaii live with a mental health condition. So this statistic comes from the State of Mental Health in America report that Mental Health America is a national organization, comes out with every year, right? So their most recently made available report is their 2023 report. It really captures data from like the previous year. So when we say almost 18% of residents in Hawaii, what they are really capturing is kind of in the year of 2020, in their 2023 report. But of that almost 18% of residents here in Hawaii who have experienced or living with a mental health condition, 69.1% did not receive any sort of treatment or any sort of help for that. Okay? And I think that speaks a lot to the kind of help-seeking behaviors that we often see, not even necessarily just here in Hawaii, but really in the country, right? Those different types of help-seeking behaviors. There are certainly a lot of barriers that make it hard for people to access mental health related services, even when they want them. So we have to kind of be realistic about that, that we don't have a perfect mental health system in our state, unfortunately. And those barriers could range from everything to like stigma, which in my opinion might be one of the biggest barriers to accessing mental health services. What stigma has the especially harmful effect of doing is silencing the discussion, right? It really makes it hard for people to actually talk about what's going on, have open and honest conversations and discussions. There could be things like financial barriers, right? Or someone maybe doesn't have insurance, or maybe they do have insurance and their plan doesn't cover the services that they need, right? Or, the provider that they want to go to isn't covered under their plan or within their network. So, lots of like financial barriers or potential financial barriers. It could be logistical barriers. Most of the resources and services that we have here in the state of Hawaii are here on Oahu, so our neighbor islands, right? It can be even harder to access mental health related services. There's really long wait times, right? If you want to sign up for therapy, you could be looking at like an 8 to 10 week wait time to even just get an appointment. If we're talking about youth who are looking at wanting to connect with a psychiatrist, for example, or a provider who can prescribe medication, that wait could even be from anywhere from 10 to 12 weeks, right? So just kind of highlighting examples of the different types of barriers. And I think that really does contribute to that 69.1%, right, of people who are not able to get help or seek help, even though they may be living with a mental health condition. And when it comes to suicidality, we also have been keeping our eye on those rates, right? Generally about every other day, someone does die by suicide here in the state of Hawaii, and we have been getting asked a lot of questions regarding have we seen increases in rates of deaths by suicide because of the Maui wildfires, because of COVID or the pandemic, or because of other kind of factors. And the reality is, especially when it comes to data and research on deaths by suicide, is that realistically those things take a long time. It takes a long time to like determine whether that death was a death by suicide or if it was thrown into the like undetermined category, for example. To do all that research, analyze the numbers and make it available to us. So we have not quite seen a change in these numbers so far. But like I said, Mental Health America of Hawaii is working really close to and with the Prevent Suicide Hawaii Task Force. We are a part of that. And so there are other community organizations, community members, some even on this Zoom webinar today, who are checking in with each other and who are making sure that we are having these conversations and we are providing that support when it comes to suicide. Here is kind of a chart that outlines what we know so far about suicidality in the state of Hawaii. So this is a chart that shows the causes of fatal injuries separated by age group. So across the top, we have the different age ranges. On the left-hand side going down, we have the different. So we can see here that suicide is one of the top causes for fatal injury deaths here in the state of Hawaii, kind of across the board. Overall, it's the second leading cause of fatal injuries, and these are fatal injuries only. These are not deaths related to things like cancer or chronic diseases. These are deaths related to car accidents, drownings, falls, poisonings, and deaths by suicide. But anytime I see statistics or research or data, especially when it comes to suicidality, I think it's important for us to also look for opportunities of hope, right? Or messages of hope, even in concerning numbers and data like this, right? Of course, it could be absolutely concerning for us to see that suicide is so high up there, especially like for our youth ages, right? Ages 15 to 21, 29. It's the top cause of fatal injury death. But what I want you all especially to take away from this is that suicide prevention does work, okay? Not everyone who thinks about suicide, not everyone who makes a plan, not even everyone who attempts suicide actually dies by suicide. So that's what I want you to hold on to, is that suicide prevention does work. And We know prevention efforts in general work, right? If we think about car accident related deaths, we have seen over the past couple of decades those decreasing, mainly because of the vast amount of prevention efforts that have been put into preventing them, right? So things like creating safer vehicles, establishing traffic laws and policies, requiring seatbelts, raising awareness about drunk driving or distracted driving. So I really do think that if we put that same amount or same level of effort into suicide prevention, we would also see a change in these numbers here. And there are a lot of really great efforts happening towards suicide prevention across the state. If you are interested in learning more about what those efforts are, you want to become more involved, please feel free to reach out to me. I would happy to put you in contact with the Prevent Suicide Hawai'i Task Force. There are also individual county task forces as well. Okay, so here's also kind of another graph just to help us be aware of what kind of risk factors that we want to look out for. Now, risk factors are just that, right? They are things that could be present in someone's life that could put them at risk for maybe struggling with their mental health, right? So this graph provides an overview of the different types of risk factors that impact mental health and where they can be seen in various times in various settings. So to orient you a little bit to this graph, because the first time I looked at it, I was like, what am I looking at? Right? This is like so wild. But to orient you a little bit, so across the bottom, we see a progression of developmental stages, right? Starting from early childhood all the way into older adulthood. To the left, right, we see the different levels of systems that make up our society. So starting from the bottom on an individual, right, kind of level, and then as we move upwards, we start to branch out, right, broadening out to what makes up different cultures and policies and norms. And then across the top is where we see examples of different types of settings, right, where we can identify these various risk factors. So the easiest way to navigate this graph is to start at the bottom, right? Let's say adulthood, since I think we're all pretty much adults right here on the call right now. So if we start at adulthood and let's say we draw a line straight up to work, because it's still Friday, happy that it's Friday, but it's midday Friday, so we're still working. So if we draw a line from adulthood straight up to work, all of the risk factors that fall along on that line or near that line are potential risk factors that we can identify, right? For all of us, anyone who identifies as an adult who is working, right? So things like, not having the best physical health, maybe there's harmful use of alcohol, financial instability, unemployment, job insecurity, right? Maybe we're living in an unsafe environment, or there's maybe community violence near us, adverse media influences, right? Discrimination, social inequities, and all of these things have impacts on people's mental health, and it could potentially put them at risk, right? So that's probably the easiest way to navigate a chart like this. And I have seen a couple questions in the chat, and I promise I have seen them, and I'll be able to answer, especially the stigma one. Probably towards the end, I'll save that one to dive a little deeper into it. But Maka is already in the chat too, answering questions. Yes, you will receive copies of all of these slides, and I will make sure that my contact information is also made available to all of you if you don't already have it, just in case you have any questions on any of this as well. So while we have seen an overall impact on mental health kind of across the board, right? And we've seen specifically also here in Hawaii what those impacts have kind of looked like over the past few years. We also want to make sure that we're checking in with and we're keeping our eye on vulnerable communities or populations, right? When we say vulnerable populations, just means that these communities would benefit from extra support, extra opportunities to practice self-care and identify coping skills, right? So individuals who may be at high risk who have contracted COVID-19, or just in general, maybe they're living with something like a chronic illness, right? Or they have a lot of physical health problems, they're also at risk for struggling with their mental health, or more likely. Anyone who already has a pre-existing mental health condition, right? We've seen an increase in severity of their symptoms, so also a vulnerable population we want to check in with. Healthcare providers and first responders, especially after big events, right? Like stuff like natural disasters, making sure we're checking in all those first responders, healthcare providers, public health workers, to make sure that they're doing okay because they are the first ones to respond. They're checking in, making sure everyone else is doing okay. They often neglect themselves. Certain age groups we want to keep an eye on too, right? So it's really kind of the bookends, right? The young, sorry, our keiki, our teens, our youth. There is a youth mental health crisis, right, currently happening. So making sure we're checking in with our youth, supporting them to the best of our ability, and then our kapunas, right, our older generations, making sure they are being supported as well. Caregivers certainly could benefit from extra support as well because similarly to healthcare providers and first responders, they're making sure everyone around them is good, right? Maybe they're caregiving for parents, right? Aging parents or elderly parents alongside with having to care for children, like little ones running around. So you can see how that kind of stress and anxiety might pile up. For caregivers, individuals with employment status changes, maybe someone has lost their job or they've had to, do a career change. Folks experiencing houselessness, socially isolated individuals, marginalized groups such as LGBTQ plus communities. So these are just examples of the different types of what we mean by vulnerable populations. And again, all that we mean by that is that they could benefit from extra help and support. All right, so let's explore some of the signs and symptoms that are often associated with feelings of anxiety. And I'm sure we all are familiar with these, right, in various ways. So on the left-hand side are a list of the kind of psychological symptoms, right? So all the things that have to do with our mind, with our thought patterns, with our emotions. Okay. So it could look like things like excessive worry, racing thoughts, maybe someone who cannot stop thinking about the things that scare them, worry them, stress them out. Those thoughts are just running through their head. It's hard to think about anything else. Or maybe those thoughts are so jumbled up in someone's head that their mind goes blank. It's hard to think about anything at all. And then it's hard to concentrate. It's hard to focus. It's hard to pay attention. Things like restlessness, agitation. This could also look like even outward expressions of irritability and agitation. I think a lot of times when we talk about mental health, specifically when we talk about depression, our minds jump straight to feeling sad, right? Or feeling down or upset. But sometimes when someone is struggling with their mental health, that actually looks like anger and frustration and irritability, right? And kind of acting out in different ways. And that is especially true for some of our youth here in Hawaii who are experiencing depression, is that they're not always, presenting as sadness. They're presenting as anger and acting out, and maybe getting into trouble for different things, and we view that as something that needs to be punished, right? When we need to start looking at it as an opportunity to support these youth, right? To figure out kind of what's going on. Sleep related problems, of course, has a really big impact on our overall health. Over the past few years in Hawaii, I think I think in the United States, I should say, research has shown that everyone's sleep has been impacted by about 30 minutes. So, on average, people are getting 30 minutes less quality sleep because of everything that's been happening over the past few years. Hawaii is one of the states that ranks like the highest in not getting enough sleep every night. And there are a lot of different factors that go into that. We actually have a sleep hygiene presentation, and you can find a recording of that on our YouTube channel, which I think I have the YouTube channel handle at the very end. So you can look that up to find out more data, how to get better sleep in that. Because if you think about it, if we're getting 30 minutes less sleep every night, that builds up on itself, right? And then that starts to take a toll on our overall health. Maybe it exacerbates these psychological symptoms, or maybe it starts to take a toll on our physical health as well, right? So kind of segueing into the physiological symptoms, these are the physical manifestations of anxiety, right? This is where we start to feel things in our body. And we don't always talk about the physical or physiological symptoms that can be associated with anxiety, right? Maybe we have been noticing some jaw pain because we've been tensing our jaw or clenching our jaw for the past 15 minutes and we haven't even realized it, right? Or maybe we got some like neck, shoulder, and back pain. We're like, I don't know why, right? I didn't work out today, unfortunately, but we have like the kind of muscle tension that's slowly building up over our days, right? And throughout our weeks that takes a toll, right? And we kind of feel it in our bodies. I think also too, historically, there has been a little bit of a disconnect between physical health and mental health in our society, but they are very much so connected, right? And they influence each other. And I like the direction that healthcare is going in the sense that we want to take a look at the whole person, right? And how does mental health and physical health influence each other in different ways? So just really quickly, let's say I pulled up the slide and I only showed you the right hand side. Okay. So the physiological symptoms. If someone came up to you and said, my heart's beating really fast, it's hard for me to breathe, I got some like pain in my chest, I'm feeling really dizzy, right? What would you think that they might be experiencing? And feel free to drop that in the chat if we only saw the right hand side of symptoms. Oh, see in the chat right away, bunch of you saying heart attack, stroke, allergic reaction even, right? All these things. So, medical always comes before the mental. I think that's just a good rule of thumb to have, right? So if we're unsure if someone's symptoms are related to a medical condition or if they're mental health related, it's best for us to always divert to the medical because we want to be sure, right? Does this person have a history of heart related problems? Have they checked in with their PCP recently, with their doctors? Okay. And if we're unsure, again, best practice is to address the possible medical reasons first and foremost. But we do want to educate ourselves too on how these possible physiological symptoms can also be mental health related too. Okay, so you may remember a few slides ago that we mentioned the importance of identifying like risk factors and things of that nature. And I think that's important for us to do, right? We want to know what to look out for if it's going to put someone at risk, right? But I think what we sometimes miss are protective factors and building resiliency, right? Sometimes we don't always identify those things. And I think it's really important that we do. And there actually has been research coming out that shows protective factors and building resiliency are more impactful or more influential than risk factors. Okay. And I'm sure we've heard this word being utilized a lot, especially over the past few years, right? We have to be resilient as a community to get through things like a pandemic or a natural disaster. We have to be resilient as an individual to be able to get through the things that we need to get through. So I know this word has kind of been utilized a lot. So let's take a look a little bit about what exactly do we mean when we say resiliency, right? When we talk about being resilient. So to help build resiliency, what we mean by that is learning, using, and sharing coping skills, right? What are the skills we're utilizing ourselves to be able to ground ourselves, right? To manage extreme levels of anxiety or stress. How much are we focusing on self-care on a regular basis, right? We can plan ahead to the best of our ability, right? So that we may feel better prepared for any kind of upcoming challenging situations, or maybe even make ourselves feel less anxious about uncertainty in general. But, we can't tell the future, we can't always plan ahead, but we could try, right? In certain things in different areas. Sometimes it's going back to the basics and making sure we're taking care of our physical needs, our physical health, that we're exercising regularly, that we're eating a healthy, balanced diet to the best of our ability, that we're staying hydrated, that we are getting a good amount of sleep every night, but also that we're taking breaks as needed, right? Taking breaks is okay too. If you can find that quiet place or space and just take a few minutes for yourself, right? I know we as a society really view productivity, right, and multitasking as almost like a good thing. Like we wear it as a badge of honor. We're like, look at all the things I'm doing at the same time, all the plates I'm juggling, right? All the hats that I'm wearing. But we have to make sure that we're giving ourselves even little times, right? Little breaks. Otherwise, we are wearing ourselves out from the inside out. We want to make sure we're staying connected too. We as human beings are very social, like creatures, social beings. We crave that feeling of connection. So identifying who is in our support system, friends, family, right? Other people we interact with, but also feeling connected to a sense of community, whatever that community may be for you. And then remember that you're doing your best and that is good enough, right? I think that sometimes we forget this, right? That we are human beings and sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes things don't always turn out the way we wanted them to or that we hoped that they would. Sometimes life is life, right? And so we have to remind ourselves that it doesn't matter how big the steps are that we're taking, right? Or how often we may even stumble along the way, just as long as we continue moving forward in the right direction and take pride in those like little wins, right? I woke up on time today, I washed my hair, the dishes got done, the kids learned something new today, right? Those are all things that we can take pride in throughout our day and remind ourselves, right, that I'm doing my best and that is good enough. You'll notice some of these images have different tags and things on them, and that's because they come from our one of our social media pages that we have on Instagram is called Live Now. So we post different tips, right, and pieces of information on how to practice, um, that self love, how to practice that self care. We want to invest in our mental health. We want to invest in ourselves. Right? And usually when we hear that word invest, we get like almost stressed or anxious even. It's like, oh, finances, right? And finances could be a source of stress for a lot of us, but we can invest in ourselves as a person and invest in our mental health too. We can like think of it in the same way. So, for example, with finances, we want to invest, right? Hopefully put a little bit away on a regular basis so that we have something to pull from if and when we need it. If we have an unexpected bill, right? Our car has to go into the shop, right? And we're like worried, like, how much is this going to be? We'll have a little bit of cushion. Yeah. But we can think of self care in the same way, right? By practicing self care on a regular basis, all you're doing is making emotional deposits, right? You're depositing, investing into that emotional bank account. And there may come a time down the road where you'll have to pull from that emotional bank account to support yourself because you may be struggling with something, or you may have to pull from that emotional bank account to support another person. Right? But the more deposits that we can make, then the more cushion we have to pull from. And the cool thing about self care is that you get to decide what works for you. And there's a lot of different ways to be able to practice that self care. The key is carving out the time, right? And making it a priority sometimes, even if that's just 5 minutes out of your day, right? Couple times a day throughout. If you can do that on a regular basis, then awesome. That's you investing in yourself. Now, when it comes to self-care, there's actually a lot of different kind of pieces that make up self-care. So here's some of the things that we can do to take care of ourselves. One of them is to validate our emotions. We as human beings experience a whole wide range of different types of emotions that we have no control over, right? We feel things as we feel them. But what we do have some control over at the very least is our responses, right? What are we doing to help manage ourselves? And emotions can be circular. We can feel lost or overwhelmed at different times, right? And we can circle back to feeling like pretty okay, right? Balanced, not as stressed or not as anxious, and then go right back to feeling lost or overwhelmed, right? So the emotions can circulate, they're continuously changing. And with so much that is happening, right, and constantly changing, because of everything that's been happening over the past few years and things that are still currently happening in our world, right, our society and our different viewpoints today, it's really important that we go back to validating our emotions, okay? Because it's normal to have these types of responses when we encounter stressful situations or we read about stressful things, right, in the news. It's normal for us to have responses to that. So it's okay to be feeling the way that we're feeling. Your experiences are your experiences, and they are absolutely valid. Okay? It's even normal for us to experience mixed emotions, right? Sometimes we got a couple of them circulating around in us, right, at the same time, where those things fluctuate throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout a lifetime. But again, What we do have some control over is how are we responding to them. And hopefully after today, you'll have a couple new ideas of approaches and how to address this increasing level of stress and anxiety. Staying connected, I already talked a little bit about this and how important that is for us to feel connected to the people that we have in our support systems, but also to a sense of community. Try not to overcheck too. And by this, I mean the news, maybe even social media, if that's where we get our news from. Okay. I understand wanting to stay informed, right? We want to stay informed, we want to stay up to date, but it may not be the most helpful approach to take to continuously check the news throughout the day, multiple times a day, or to continuously go on social media to get that information, especially with so many different kinds of, and sometimes even conflicting sources of information that are constantly being made available to us, right? It's almost instant. We can hop on our phone and read like so many different articles about the same thing that are all saying completely different things, right? So consider, if you are someone who likes to stay informed, okay, and you find yourself constantly checking the news throughout the day and you notice it starting to take an impact on your levels of stress and anxiety, consider setting some time points, right? Maybe a time or two during the day for you to be able to get the information that you need instead of continuously checking it all throughout. Sometimes I compare this to almost like how we would monitor our coffee intake. Because I'm a big coffee drinker. I love my coffee, but I know that if I have too much coffee, then I feel a little anxious, right? I start getting a little shaky and like really aware of like my heartbeat or something, right? And I know also if I have coffee too late in the day, that it might affect my ability to fall asleep later on that evening, right? So if you have those same kind of responses when it comes to checking the news, I think it would be a good approach to think about just setting some time points in your day where you can get the information that you need. And that way you can spend the other parts of your day focusing on the things that you need to focus on. Checking in, we've talked about this, right? We want to keep our eye on vulnerable populations, but we especially want to make sure that we're checking in on the essential workers, the vulnerable in our circles. We also want to make sure that we check in on the people who are the strong ones, right? The foundations, the rocks, right? They're the ones that everyone turns to when they have a tough time. They're like the life of the party, we want to make sure that we check in with those strong people too, because they are spending all their time making sure everyone around them is good, right? Everyone around them is okay. And it could be that no one has ever asked them that question. Hey, how are you doing? Right? Are you okay? So just a little quick PSA from Amanda, right? Check in on those people who seem strong, right? Who are the rocks, the foundations in your social circles too, because they absolutely could benefit from support sometimes. And creature comforts, right? I'm sure I don't have to go too deep into this, right? But if you have a pet in your life or you have access to a pet that you get along with, that does wonders as a way to practice that self-care, to connect with something and someone that, you know, just loves you so unconditionally, right? Or feeling like you're able to take care of someone and interact with an animal, whether that's a furry animal, feathery, scaly, whatever pet you may have or have access to. It's a great way to practice self-care that we feel better afterwards too. Other things that make up self-care, we like routines, we like schedules as human beings. So to the best of our ability, follow a schedule, follow routines, try to go to bed around the same time every night, wake up around the same time every morning. But this also includes scheduling in our self-care. So if you are a planner, right? If you like, I got my planner out my day planned out from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed, make sure you write down times that you can um practice self-care. Write it down in your calendar, even if it's just 5 minutes, like I said, right? Or if you have a Zoom meeting that maybe ends a little bit early, instead of looking around, right? Trying to fill it with something in order to be productive, try just sitting there, right? Just sitting with that time. And it's a chance to give yourself a break, or something will organically come up, right? For you to be able to do. And hopefully it's something that you can take care of yourself with, right? In regards to practicing that self. Use social media responsibly, right? I know we've been hearing a lot of things, okay, in regards to social media, that there's some good parts of it, but there's definitely a lot of bad parts to it too. So even as adults, we want to make sure that we are utilizing social media responsibly. reminding ourselves, right, that even when we're online, we should remain respectful, compassionate, even when there may be sometimes differences of opinions, things that we don't always see eye to eye on. Sometimes we got to check in with ourselves and ask, right, is what I'm posting, is what I'm sharing, is what I'm commenting helpful? Is this going to be beneficial to the conversation? Is this going to be beneficial to someone's timeline, right, or their feed, or to their lives, or to their days? If it's not, maybe it's not something that we should post, right, or comments or jump in on. No, it's also okay to take breaks from social media too. That sometimes we do have to unplug, right? Get outside, breathe in that fresh air, right? Get some vitamin D and get off of our devices, even though I know we're all very attached to those things, but it's okay to take breaks. So check in with yourself and your social media use, right? I mean, you can literally ask yourself, do I feel better after going on Instagram or X or Twitter, or Twitter is X now, right? So Instagram, right? Facebook, if you're still using that, TikTok. If that answer starts to become like, no, I'm not sure, or I feel worse after I look at my social media, it might be a good indication that it's starting to have a negative impact on our mental health. So it might be a good idea to set some boundaries around that, or even consider taking identifying online resources kind of goes along with utilizing social media responsibly, is that we're just doing our homework, right? We're making sure any kind of online resource we are identifying, and especially if we're passing it along, that we are making sure it's coming from a reputable source and a reputable organization. Okay, now, when someone is struggling with their mental health, we've already kind of talked about those quote unquote normal responses to stress and anxiety. So remember the physiological and psychological symptoms. That's something that we all experience when we encounter things like anxiety and stress, right? So let's take a look at the question is, when is it more? When is it beyond just a normal response to a stressful situation? So when it kind of crosses that line is if any of these things are happening. So, mood dysregulation for 2 weeks or longer. Has your mood been impacted for an extended period of time? 2 weeks is just like a good benchmark for us. Okay. It's an indication that some time has passed. Right. If someone has been acting differently, their mood hasn't quite been the same, or they've been dysregulated for an extended period of time, it's a good opportunity to check in with them. Anhedonia is a fancy word for loss of interest. Right? So the things that someone used to really enjoy doing, it made them happy, brought them joy, satisfaction, made them feel productive and accomplished. It doesn't have that same effect anymore, right? Maybe they have a favorite TV show, no matter how many times that they watch it, it makes them happy, right? You could watch it over and over again, but in when someone may be struggling with their mental health or experiencing high levels of stress and anxiety, they can watch that same TV show and not feel that same kind of happiness or joy, right? So they start to pull away from activities that they like. Any kind of expression of suicidality is a big warning sign for us. Someone who's having thoughts of suicide, they're expressing those thoughts, they're making plan, right? We those are more kind of red flag warning signs. We would definitely want to make sure that we are connecting someone to help sooner rather than later, because any kind of expression of suicidality is an indication that safety might be an issue, and safety is always our number one priority. So we definitely want to make sure if someone may be struggling with suicide, that we're connecting them to help and support. And the rest of the slide, or the warning signs, is kind of looking at how much of an impact is this having on someone's ability to function, right? Are those levels of stress and anxiety, or maybe any kind of symptoms that they may be experiencing for various mental health challenges, is it affecting their ability to wake up on time, show up on time to work, not just show up to work, but be productive, right? Get things done, be efficient. Is it affecting their ability to connect with other people? Right? So is it starting to take a toll on friendships and relationships with the people around them? Is it starting to affect their ability to physically take care of themselves? Yeah. So like skipping meals, right? Changes in sleep patterns or behaviors, not getting enough sleep or any sleep at all, things of that nature. If it's starting to have an impact on those different areas of someone's life, then that's a good opportunity to check in with someone if we maybe are noticing these things in someone that we have in our life, or if we're starting to notice these things in our own life, that's a good opportunity to think about reaching out for some extra help and support. There's a lot of different ways to be able to do that, and it looks differently for here's just a quick slide on work warning signs. So there's just like things we want to look out for while we're at work. Okay, so eating, sleeping, focus is disrupted in general. Um, we maybe have isolating behaviors. Maybe we're skipping breaks, that we're not actually taking lunch. Like we're trying to sneak bites in between sending emails, right? That's not actually giving ourselves a break. And kind of working through that, right? Maybe just in general, we're enjoying work less. And it used to be really something that we look forward to because we love our job, right? We're really passionate about our careers, but we really start to notice that I'm not having that same kind of enjoyment or fulfillment from my work. Maybe we find ourselves bored or even irritated. This says in sessions, but not all of us are mental health professionals, so we don't actually go into sessions. But whatever that looks like in regards to your work, right? Maybe you're feeling emotionally exhausted, or maybe there's some recent life stressors that we are experiencing that I need to make note of, right? If we learned anything in the past 2 years, is that it has really blended our personal and professional lives, and this could absolutely impact our work. I think historically we had this mindset of like, you know, work is work, home is home, right? My personal life is my personal life, my work life is my work life, and never shall the two meet, right? But when everyone started working from home or working remotely, if you were able to do that, we were inviting people into our homes, right? And so it makes sense that recent life stressors, even though those things are maybe happening in our personal life, that it might impact our ability to function at work, right? Or to be productive at work. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, right? To acknowledge that blending. Because if we're able to acknowledge it, then it means we're able to address it and find ways to help manage it. Other things, right? Overlooking personal needs, staring off into space, right? It's hard to focus. We're just kind of like, oh, like taking a little mental break in that way, right? So these would be indications to us that maybe we're experiencing that really high level of stress and anxiety at our job or at our work. Um, I think it's really important to touch upon this process of grief and also to acknowledge this. And I'd say just touch on it because we do want to keep our focus on hope and healing and moving forward. But, grief is something that we all have experienced in some form or fashion over the past few years. And grief is not just the loss of a person or a loved one, right? I think that's what we normally think of grief as being, is that I've lost someone close to me. But grief at its core is the loss of something in general. And we, again, have all experienced losses in different ways over the past few years. Right? Maybe it's been the loss of a relationship. Maybe it's been the loss of expectations of how you wanted something to turn out, or you hoped that something would turn out, whatever that may be. And so everyone grieves in their own way. And it's important that we honor that process of grief. And this is especially where validating our emotions and experiences is important. Again, it's okay to feel what you're feeling. We have to try to stay away from cross comparing our experiences with other people. And I hear this a lot, right? I hear this a lot, like with my friends. I hear this a lot, like when I go do different presentations or have work related conversations, is that, other people have it way worse than I do. Like, I shouldn't be feeling this bad about this thing that happened to me or this thing that happened in my life, because there's people out there who have lost their homes. There's people out there who can't put food on the table every day, right? And so we find ourselves kind of cross comparing our experiences with other people. And I think it's important that we gain context for our situation, but we have to be careful that we're not invalidating how we feel because we feel that others may have it worse. When it comes down to it, pain is pain, and we all need support surrounding that. And especially if you yourself are going through the grief process, I encourage you to find support in that because it is a process, it's a journey. Right? There's, different cycles to it. Sometimes we go back through the same stages, periodically, even if a long time has passed. So if you find yourself in that grief process and you're having trouble kind of managing it or processing it, reach out for help, right? There are resources that are out there that can help walk with you on this journey. When we talk about checking in, I've mentioned it a few times already. There's different ways to be able to do this too, right? So whether we talk about checking in with another person, maybe we've been recognizing some of those warning signs, we're starting to become concerned. This is kind of a good guide of how to start that conversation. So asking questions, right? How is someone doing from the day to day? Or even checking in with ourselves, kind of seeing where we're at. How am I doing from day to day? How's my sleep? How is their sleep? How is someone's mood? Okay. How are my relationships? Am I able to stay connected? Right? Do I feel connected, or am I starting to withdraw and kind of isolate myself a bit? How's work going? How's school? Right? How are different areas and different settings and places in my life? How are those things going? And I think one of the most important questions that we can ask is, do I feel hopeful? Does someone else feel hopeful? Hope is so important for building resiliency, right? Hope is what keeps us moving forward. And if someone feels like there is no hope, that there's nothing to look forward to, or maybe it's hard to see that hope in the moment, then that's really what leads to that kind of stuck feeling. Yeah, that sense of helplessness. I don't know which way to turn. I don't know what next step to take. I don't even know what to do in general, right? We're kind of stuck. So, hope is really important. We want to be able to identify if someone does feel hopeful or not. Because if not, then we want to make sure we're connecting them to support, right? To someone who can help them find. Now, I've mentioned periodically throughout the presentation the importance of connecting someone to help and support if they may possibly be suicidal. So, all of these questions are good kind of checking in questions. We're starting the conversation. If we are worried that someone may be having thoughts of suicide, we also need to ask about those, right? Are you thinking about suicide? Could you be thinking about killing yourself? It's something we've heard before that we don't want to ask direct questions like that. We don't want to talk about suicide because we don't want to put ideas in people's heads, but it doesn't work like that, right? We want to ask because we want to know. We need to ask because we need to know. And if we're not asking, then we don't know. And if we don't know, how are we supposed to try to help that person? So there's amazing trainings that are out there being offered to the community that are specific to suicide prevention and suicide intervention even. We offer some of them even through Mental Health America of Hawai'i. Sign up for our newsletter, check in with different resources in your community to see when those trainings are being offered, if that's something that you're interested in learning a little bit more about. Okay, so another way to check in with ourselves is using something a little more structured, like a Likert scale or a Likert scale of responding, right? Again, just yet another way for us to check in and gauge where we are at when it comes to our stress and anxiety levels, and then really think about the skills and the tools that we can use to help, right? Or to manage them when we are in a certain place. So there is actually a difference between self care and coping skills, right? So self care activities are the things that we do from the day to day, right? They're the things that we like doing, makes us happy, helps us relax and unwind, right? Coping skills are the things that we do to calm down our nervous systems. Because one of the things that happens when we experience stress or anxiety is that our nervous systems become activated. So coping skills really help us in calming down our bodies and managing those physiological symptoms that we may be experiencing. So, how this scale works, it ranges from 0 to 100. It's separated into three different levels, right? So the first one we have is 0 to 40. This is the range that we're in when we feel good. I feel okay. I'm not really stressed, right? I don't have anxiety in my life. It's only when you're moving closer to that 40 mark where you might start to notice that I'm a little anxious or I have like a limited awareness of that anxiety or stress. So, this range, 0 to 40, is where self care is especially effective. This is the range that we want to be depositing into our self care bank accounts, right? So we're going back to the basics. We're making sure we're staying hydrated, taking a look at our sleep, diet, exercise, physical activity. We're doing the activities that we enjoy doing because we enjoy doing them, right? Makes us happy. So this is where we can really be effective in building resiliency. The next stage is 40 to 60. So this is the range that we are definitely aware that we're experiencing anxiety or stress to the point where we can start to feel it in our bodies, right? We start to experience those physiological symptoms. So we may notice when we're in this range that those really awesome self-care activities that we love doing aren't really having the same effect, right? Because our nervous systems are definitely activated. So in this range, right, we want to try to use a combination of self-care tools, activities, and coping skills to help manage these increasing levels, right? And help manage these physiological symptoms. The last range is 60 to 100. This is the range that I'll be kind of really highlighting over the next few slides and the different approaches that we can take to help manage. It's where we're experiencing those high levels of anxiety, right? Where we almost start to feel overwhelmed with that stress. So it's really important that we identify distress tolerance skills because we need to calm ourselves down, right? First and foremost, before we can even think about doing self care activities, right? What are the skills that I can do to help ground myself again, right? Bring me back into myself. And then I can start taking a look at, okay, what can I do to continue making myself feel better? Right? And I think one of the reasons why we want to highlight these, right, that kind of last 60 to 100 range specifically over the next few slides is because of everything that's been happening over the past few years and things that we may be having going on in our personal lives, that everyone's baseline when it comes to stress and anxiety is a little elevated, right? So whereas, before maybe we were in the 0 to 40 range, everything was pretty manageable. And when we had additional stress and anxiety, it pushed us into the 40 to 60 range, but still pretty manageable. Yeah. Because everyone's baselines are elevated, a lot of us are actually starting in the 40 to 60 range. So any additional experiences of stress and anxiety pushes us over into that 60 to 100 range where we feel really overwhelmed with things. So there are actual ways and approaches that we can utilize to help manage those high levels of stress and anxiety. One of the more effective approaches and tools is practicing mindfulness, right? And there's actually a lot of different pieces that make up practicing mindfulness as well, right? Staying present focused, I've already mentioned this one, is incredibly helpful. But I will say that people who maybe struggle with anxiety have a hard time staying in the moment, right? Kind of staying present focused. And I struggle with anxiety, right? So I definitely struggle with staying present focused because maybe I'm stuck thinking about the past and how it still affects me to this day. Or maybe I'm stuck thinking and worrying about the future, right? And how can I prepare for it or plan for it, right? When I can't tell any of that, right? I'm not psychic, right? I can't tell the future or anything like that. So if we are stuck in the past or we're stuck worrying about the future, then we're spending energy on things that can't be changed, right? Or we're stuck trying to predict things that we cannot generally predict. Okay? We can plan ahead to the best of our ability to a certain extent to ease some of that anxiety, but it isn't always foolproof, right? Who could have predicted a pandemic, right? For example, or natural disasters or things like that. So being present focused means focusing on the things that we do have control over and also practicing radical acceptance when it's things that we don't have control over, right? That radical acceptance is kind of, it is what it is. If I can change something, I'll change it. If I can't change it, I need to accept that this thing is unchangeable and do my best to try to move on, right? So, really easy for me to summarize that, right? Completely different thing to actually practice it in your everyday lives, okay? But generally, when we're holding on to thoughts of things like unfairness, right, or things that we cannot change, it doesn't help us in accepting the reality of a situation. And again, that leads us to being in that kind of stuck place. And it's important to note that acceptance is not the same thing as agreement. Accepting that something painful has happened and moving forward and processing it and finding help surrounding that is not the same thing as saying it's okay that that painful thing happened, but rather that I'm taking the energy from denying that it happened or ruminating over it and then putting it towards healing, right? And this takes practice. Sometimes it even helps. It takes the help of a mental health professional to help kind of guide you on this journey of radical acceptance. But it really does help in managing, especially high levels of stress and anxiety surrounding the things that we don't have control. Meditation and prayer is also really effective. This can be practiced within an organized religion or outside of one. So, really kind of thinking about what are the things that we're doing actively to take care of our spirit, to take care of our soul. Making sure that we're trying also to stay single task minded versus multitask minded, even if we feel like we're really good multitaskers, right? Anytime we multitask, it means our attention is split. Right? So we're still going to have, increased levels of anxiety because we're not fully present. Right? And when our attention is split like that, especially if we have a lot of things on our plate, that really opens up things for like mistakes to happen, right? Or feelings that maybe we're not getting things done, which could add to the stress and the anxiety. So if we can focus, right, be present focus, but also focus on one thing at a time, it does help to manage. We can also practice mindfulness with other people, right? So when we're checking in, when we're having conversations with our friends, with our loved ones, we could be mindful about that too, right? We want to be accessible, responsive, engaged. We want to be good listeners in general, and listening, it may seem easy, but being a good listener actually takes some effort. It's more than just sitting there and then someone talk at you, right? But it's allowing space for a conversation to happen. Sometimes it's asking questions to ensure our understanding or to find out more information or to clarify something. And it's our nonverbal body language as well. Like, what are we doing with our face and our facial expressions as someone is talking to us, right? What's our body language like? How am I being a good listener in regards to our nonverbal communication skills? Okay, so mindfulness, like I said, research shows it's a really great way to manage high levels of stress and anxiety. It's proven to be effective and beneficial in supporting mental wellness and overall our mental health. When it comes to specific coping skills, mindfulness is an example of a coping skill, but there's also a lot of really other awesome ones that are out there. Okay? Breathing exercises, one of my favorite coping skills, and I'll touch upon it a little bit more on the next slide. There's also things like progressive muscle relaxation, right? So essentially, what we're doing is we're trying to use our bodies to trick our minds a little bit. So we go through different muscle groups, we hyper tighten them so that when we release, it's a hyper release and we can feel that tension falling away. For me personally, progressive muscle relaxation is actually pretty effective. Sometimes it even helps me fall asleep at night. And we have recordings of how to do pretty much all of these coping skills on our YouTube channel. So if you're interested in any of them, I unfortunately don't have time to do a deep dive into all of them in this presentation, but that information is out there. You can absolutely learn them. You can share them too. Autogenic training is kind of the other side of the coin to progressive muscle relaxation, where we're using our mind to trick our body, right? So it does involve a little bit of self-hypnosis, but it can be effective with some people. Grounding exercises are really effective as well. So, engaging with your senses, right? Think, identify 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can hear, 3 things that you can touch, 2 things that you smell, 1 thing that you taste, right? And kind of going through all the different senses and grounding ourselves again, really effective. And especially if you have that kind of overwhelmed feeling. And aromatherapy can be effective as well. Aromatherapy, just as a quick note, it's not just smelling things that you like smelling, right? I love the smell of laundry, I love the smell of coffee, but it doesn't mean that's aromatherapy. So if you are interested in getting into aromatherapy, I encourage you to do some research, do some homework, right? Make sure you talk with someone who's really familiar with aromatherapy, knows what they're talking about, or find those reliable resources. When it comes to essential oils, I know that there are some that should only be used when they are diffused. Others may be unsafe for pets or children. So that's why we want to do our research when it comes to aromatherapy, but could be another effective coping skill for us to try and utilize. So breathing exercises, some of my favorite ones, right? So I love breathing exercises because it's something that you can do no matter where you are, no matter when you need it, without drawing too much attention to yourself. So I'm going to invite you really quickly to join me in a practice of deep breathing. And I'll explain it a little bit more, kind of the background of it and why we want to focus on our diaphragm, right? Because I think a lot of times when people say take a deep breath, we're like, right? We think pulling from this upper chest area is what gives us the most amount of oxygen, but it's actually our diaphragm, which is more towards the top of our stomach, that is the most effective in the area that we want to focus on because we have a nerve that's right behind our stomach. So when we're breathing, right, and expanding our diaphragm in that way, it kind of presses on that nerve and then it calms our body down, right, physiologically. So when it comes to diaphragmatic breathing, again, we want to focus on that upper stomach area, but sometimes it's hard to tell, right? So there's a lot of different ways to practice this. One of the easiest ones is to take just one hand, put it on your chest. Take your second hand, put it on the top of your stomach, just above your belly button. I'm a little off camera here, but just this area right there. Okay. So we're gonna practice breathing together. I'm gonna count you through the entire thing, but as you all breathe in, I want the hand that's on your stomach to move a little more, to push out a little further than the hand that's on your chest, right? Try to be really aware of pulling from the diaphragm instead of the upper chest area. Okay, so let's try this all together. Go ahead, find a comfortable seated or standing position. You can close your eyes if you feel comfortable in doing that. We're just going to take a slow, deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let it out. 4, 3, 2, 1. Super simple, right? Let's try it again, but this time I want you to inhale through your nose and then exhale out through your mouth. So let's try this. Slow, deep breath in. 1, 2, 3, 4. And let it out. 4, 3, 2, 1. So really easy. Yeah. Like I said, breathing exercises, one of my favorite ones. They can be really effective in helping to calm, right? Calm yourself down, reground yourself. And there's a lot of different variations of it out there. So if that one wasn't really effective for you, look up others, right? Just in general, look up other coping skills and teach yourself them and even share a couple, right? It's information that we can pass along as well. So examples of distress tolerance skills. So again, these are the things that we want to be using when we're in that 60 to 100 range, when we're feeling overwhelmed. These are examples of distress tolerance skills. So it could be intensive exercise, right? Sometimes we need to burn off energy to burn off some of those stress hormones, okay? And that's a way to kind of calm ourselves. Paced breathing is similar to diaphragmatic breathing, but you're doing so in a pattern. The dive response is one of our favorite skills to pass along to other people here at Mental Health America of Hawaii. If you haven't heard of it before, essentially we have like a gland inside of our nose area that when it is submerged in water, it shuts our system down. So our lungs don't automatically expand with air, right? We automatically stop breathing because our body recognizes that I'm not in a place right now where I can take in oxygen. And some of you in your heads are probably thinking, well, duh, Amanda, I don't breathe when I'm underwater because I hold my breath, right? And you're not entirely wrong. But even when we're unexpectedly submerged, like someone pushes us into the ocean, someone pushes us into a water, that response happens, right? And as a result of that happening, what our bodies are trying to do is keep as much oxygen inside as possible. So our blood pressure lowers, our blood circulation slows down, right? Our heart rate slows because our body is trying to keep so much oxygen inside. Now, science aside, if you get this area of your face cold and wet, that response happens. Because I realize we can't all jump into the ocean when we feel overwhelmed or jump into a pool, right? We don't have access to that. So if you get a cold, wet rag and just lay it over like this portion of your face, that'll activate the dive response. And temperature is important. Make sure it's some cold water or a cold wet rag to trigger that gland. You can even get a bowl of cold water and just stick your face in it. Hold your breath for about 10 seconds or however long is comfortable for you. And just keep doing that process until you feel yourself start to calm down. So example of dive response, paired muscle relaxation is just kind of a next level to progressive muscle relaxation, but you're pairing up different muscle groups. I know we're coming up on time, and I do wanna make sure I leave time at the end for questions that have come up. But just really quickly, we'll go over kind of resources. but it's important to think about what is our support plan. Yeah. Support plans are not only for people who are in a crisis. They really are something that should be used by everyone. We should all have some idea of what our support plan is. Know who the people are that you can go to when you need help, right? When you are struggling through something, when you need to lean on someone, when you need to talk, know who those people are. But we also want to make sure we're identifying those people who make us feel better when we're around them because they're funny, right? They make us laugh. They find the best TikTok videos. We just feel better after interacting with them because we have different types of connections with different people that we can rely on at different times, right? So identify who all of those people have information on hand, right? Put them in your devices. And this includes crisis resources, right? Let's I just got a notification that my internet isn't stable. So hopefully I'm not freezing up too much for the presentation itself, but know what those crisis resources are, have them on hand, program them into your devices, and then ask yourself those bigger questions too, right? What is it that gives my life meaning, right? How do I find hope? Where can I identify hope in my life, right? So ask those bigger questions sometimes, like who am I? What kind of person do I want to be? How am I treating the people that I have in my life? What kind of impact do I want to have? What kind of footprint do I want to leave behind? Right? We always encourage youth to ask those questions to start thinking about the bigger picture, right? Think about themselves in a bigger sense. But I think it's important for us sometimes as adults to check in with those things too. Okay, so different types of resources that are available. 988 has been one that's been really pushed out over the past year and a half. It was formerly the National Suicide Crisis Line, that really long 1-800-273-TALK number. They just made it a lot easier for us by shortening it down to 988. You can call it, you can text it. Anyone who's having a mental health related emergency, that's a resource for them. We also have Hawaii Cares, which is kind of our local crisis line. So just real quick PSA about this. If you are calling 988 from an 808 area code, it's going to direct you automatically to Hawaii Cares. Again, because that's kind of our local crisis line. Yeah. But if I called 988 from my cell phone, I probably would be connected to someone in Southern California because my area code is 714. But no matter what area code or phone number you are calling from, these operators are trained to help you identify resources in your area. You may just have to let them know that you're calling from Hawaii so that they can directly transfer you to someone at Hawaii Cares. We also want to protect and respect our little ones, right? Kind of know what these resources are. Child abuse reporting hotline, child trafficking reporting hotline. Oh, went a little faster. I was excited to get to questions. Not every home is a safe place either. So know what the National Domestic Violence Hotline is. Domestic Violence Action Center here in Hawaii has really awesome resources for folks who may be experiencing intimate partner violence. There are apps that are out there that can help you practice that self-care. These were a couple of examples of ones that came out, especially during COVID. I'm not sure if they are still free to access. You may have to pay for them, but there's a lot of other very similar apps that are out there. So something like COVID Coach helps you track your mood, right? Identify stress levels. It helps you learn skills too, right? So you can learn coping skills to be able to manage those stress levels. CBTI is an example of an app that helps you take a look at your sleep hygiene, but we also have a presentation on that too. If you're more of an audio and visual learner, check out our YouTube page. Our website has this Get Connected page where you can identify other online resources. There's even fun activities that you can download and print that help you practice mindfulness with little ones, right? Like mindfulness coloring pages, things of that nature. Here's all of our social media handles. We got a couple groups that we run on Facebook if you're still on that platform and using it. We got a couple pages on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on X now. I should change that slide. Right? It's not Twitter anymore. It's X. And then our YouTube channel, which I've highlighted a few times in this presentation, where we house recordings of many of the presentations that we offer. So with that, that's pretty much everything that we have. Here's our general contact information. I'll also make sure that I drop my email in the chat just in case you're anything like me and you need time to process information that you learned. And those questions pop up later in the shower and you're like washing your hair and you're like, oh, I should have asked that. Yeah, reach out. We are happy to ask questions to the best or answer questions to the best of our ability and point people in the right direction if we're able to.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful presentation and that breathing exercise. I was right there in that. And my Zoom told me you're on mute as I was exhaling out because it probably thought I was making a little bit too strong of a noise. But thank you for that presentation. And for folks that are still on the call, if you had any questions that pop up for Amanda throughout the presentation, please feel free to drop them in the chat and the Q&A box. I kind of did want to circle back. I know there was that question had been asked earlier about how much do you think the stigma prevents people in Hawaii from getting help for their mental condition, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I mentioned earlier that stigma, in my opinion, is one of the biggest barriers when it comes to someone struggling with their mental health and then like seeking help for that. And there could be a lot of reasons behind that. I mean, there's a lot of cultural considerations that we have to take into account when it comes to mental health, especially, and because we have such diverse cultures and populations and communities here in the state of Hawaii, it's hard to make mental health services accessible to everyone, right? That's going to be a good fit for everyone. And so we're a really big proponent of making sure that people are able to connect with services and supports that are going to be effective for them. And sometimes that's not always Western medicine. Yeah, sometimes that's not always connecting with a therapist or a counselor or a mental health professional. Sometimes it is more kind of holistic and culturally based practices, and just because there hasn't been as much research put into those as things like evidence-based practices or Western types of medicine, it doesn't mean that they're not beneficial or that they couldn't be even more beneficial to someone in their family. Um, we've worked with different organizations and communities who are interested in like supporting the mental wellness of their youth, for example. And in these conversations of like identifying resources, they say like we don't even have a word for mental health in our language. Yeah, so like in the language that we speak to each other and utilize on a daily basis, we don't even have a word for mental health, or the words that we have translate to things like crazy, right, or insane or sick, which is really stigmatizing language. So I think it's being realistic about those barriers, and all of that kind of is stigma, right? And that's what makes it hard for people to access services, because we generally have like a negative portrayal of mental health in our society today. But we need to take those cultural considerations into mind, and we also need to do our best as individuals to kind of break through that barrier of stigma in the way we talk about mental health. We want to encourage people to get help and find the help that's going to be really effective for them. So I hope that answers the question that was put in there. Thank you for that one.
Yeah, no, I think that did. And I wanted to circle back. I think you just had highlighted the just wordplay and just in today's society. And I mean, we're talking about social media, we're talking about influencers. Anyone will just say the word like this is crazy or this is insane when they're just describing something that might have like tickled a little bit of like pique a little bit of interest, but we over exaggerate and over exacerbate those type of words. So for for my for my question that I have for you, are there terminology that like keywords that we should be looking at, considering some words have been overplayed and adding more words into the vocabulary? Are there any that you would suggest that either we can incorporate as we're communicating with those that are showing signs of struggle and high anxiety, and that we could help to maybe mellow them down, or just things to consider, some words to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great point to make too, is that a lot of these words and phrases have been around for a long time. We do like mental health first aid trainings for police recruits and like HPD and things like, those kind of communities. And there's a lot of stigmatizing language that they use with each other when they describe people with mental health challenges. So one of the ways that we can be mindful of our language that we're using is to utilize person first. And it kind of is as it sounds, right? That we're putting the person first. So, for example, we may hear like conversations that include words like someone is a schizophrenic or chronic or addict, alcoholic, right? And those could be that could be stigmatizing language, right? Because we're labeling a person. So when it comes to person first languaging, all we're trying to do again is put the person first. So someone who is living with schizophrenia, someone who is struggling with alcoholism, right? A person experiencing houselessness. By shifting our language, even just a little bit like that, we're respecting the person as they are as a human being, which is something that every single one of us deserves, even if we may be struggling in different ways, because everyone struggles in different ways, right? And that shouldn't be all of us. That's not our entire identity. That's just one piece. So person first languaging can absolutely be a way for us to be mindful of our language, but it takes practice. It takes time. There's even stigmatizing language surrounding suicide. For example, like saying someone committed suicide, there has been movement away from that phrase, only because when we think of the word committed, we think of like committing a crime or committing a sin or being committed to an institution. So even putting that word committed in front of the word suicide, we're kind of adding to that stigma without even realizing. Yeah. But like I said, there's a lot of really other kind of great trainings and presentations that are out there if you want to learn more about how can we talk about mental health or how can we have healthy and beneficial conversations about mental health to be able to learn more. But I would say those are the kind of good approaches that we can take as an individual.
Yeah, and you're so right. Thank you, Amanda. That was wonderful. And like even as you were talking too, like people just will casually say, "I want to kill myself" when things have just been very stressful. Like a little bit of stress. So that's good practice for myself and to move forward and just watching words because words. I mean, like words create energy, and what could be said in somewhere in public that I could be saying to myself, could be triggering to somebody else. So thank you for sharing those thoughts and thank you for the language and like how to converse with folks as we move forward after this. Just want to echo like everyone saying thank you, love your presentation. This is great general info and this has been excellent. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. And for those who are to call, yes, this is being recorded, and so we will be sharing this after the presentation with you folks that have joined the call. Another said, and thank you. So I don't see any more questions. If you wanted to, maybe we have about a couple more minutes left. If you had one last like parting thought that you want folks to take away with as we go on throughout our day and well into the weekend or on throughout life, is there a key phrase or key language that you would want us to remember shortly? I mean, you've spoken about so many, but like if you could just if you had last any last closing thoughts before I finish our webinar.
Yeah, I think if I could just echo again to take care of yourself, find out, figure out what that looks like for you, what that sounds like, what that feels like, and make the time for it. Again, even if that's just a few minutes out of your day, if you could do that on a regular basis, even if that means you gotta like lock yourself in the closet to have a few minutes of alone time to skip the kids, right? Or the partner, the spouse, or family members, do that. Okay. Find what you need to be able to fill your cup, to recharge your battery, check in with yourself to know um how does my body like experience stress and anxiety, and then that way you're able to identify those skills that are going to work for you. But yeah, just take care of yourselves. You can't pour from an empty cup, so find out what fills up your cup.
Awesome. Mahalo, Amanda. Yeah, echo that to everybody. Take care of yourselves. We can't pour from an empty cup. And so by attending today, I hope that helps revitalize you folks and that we feel like we can walk away refreshed. Again, thank you for everybody. Thank you, Amanda. Hello, you first of all for coming and presenting to us. Thank you to everybody that stayed on, and I hope you all enjoyed today's presentation. This is being recorded. As a reminder, continuing education credits that have been provided for or approved for today our CHES, CSAC, CPS, social work. We have registered dietitian, wait, did I say that already? And then nursing, sorry. So there's so many that it's a long list to choose from. And I will be sending everybody a Mahalo email shortly after this that includes the evaluation survey. Please complete that so I can track who to distribute certificates of attendance for. And all those certificates will be emailed out no later than Friday, April 26th. All right, everybody, take care. Happy Aloha Friday. Look forward to seeing everybody at our next training. Amanda will be back with us on May 10th, Grow a Rainbow, where we will talk about gender and sexual minority education 101. Thank you all. Happy Aloha Friday and have a great rest of your weeks. Bye, Amanda.
Thank you,
Rihoa.
everyone.